Briefly, I'm Catherine Webb Martinez, Interim Director of UC ANR's Program Planning and Evaluation. Welcome to today's Spotlight webinar with special guest Douglas Gayton, co-founder of The Lexicon, NGO that works to identify and accelerate the adoption of practices that build more resilient food systems and combat climate change. Very similar to the work that a lot of our colleagues do. We're going to do a 20-minute interview and then open it up for Q&A. Just a quick reminder, this Strategic Initiative Spotlight webinar series is intended to put a spotlight on particular program efforts and their positive impact for communities in California. This webinar today is specifically looking to help inform us about how we tell our stories, about how our work makes a difference to the people that we serve. We're grateful for this opportunity to learn from an expert storyteller. Douglas is an award-winning filmmaker, photographer, and writer. Before we kick off the interview, Kelly, you wanted to share a few tips, tech tips?
Yes. Again, this is a webinar, so make sure that if they're going along, you have specific questions, go ahead and drop them in the Q&A. Not the chat. Save the chat for positive remarks and cool thoughts, and use the Q&A for your questions for Douglas. Make sure that if you are using the chat, you use the drop down all panelists and attendees so everyone can see it. And we're really looking forward to getting started. So I'm going to stop my share so we can see everyone up close and get started.
Thanks, Kelly. Again, welcome, Douglas. We want to start off with, can you just tell us a little bit about how you got into storytelling and why?
Sure. First and foremost, I'm a filmmaker. I've worked as a filmmaker for decades, as a director, making everything from documentaries to commercials. And then about 20 years ago, I began incorporating photography into my work. Along the way, I spent a lot of years in digital culture. I was on the original team at America Online and Microsoft Network. For those of you who remember, I was even the creative director of Napster. So I've had a very, I've had a varied career in that as a storyteller, I've always been platform agnostic. I'm not really that concerned about what tools I'm using. What I'm mainly concerned about is what audience I want to reach, and being aware that often you have to create things in multiple formats, in multiple media, because you never know where you're going to find people. You might find them today on the web, on a mobile device, in a physical space, or on a television. So whenever we make stories at the Lexicon, we're always very aware that we need to be platform agnostic and that we need to be more focused on the content than the actual tool itself that's used to gather that content.
Great, thanks for that. On your website, it talks about how stories can inspire, mobilize, and activate. And I've heard you've said that storytelling is about changing perspective, even more so than changing behavior per se. Can you tell us a little bit about why that distinction is important?
Yeah, I mean, I find it curious that the title of our conversation today is about behavior change, when we absolutely do not believe in behavior change, first and foremost. And whenever we work with people, that's how we start. And we explain to them that behavior change is a very complicated process. It's a very complicated process that takes often exposure of somebody to something, dozens of times before they modify their relationship with an object or an idea. And so behavior change can take a very, very long time to do. But perspective change can happen in an instant. Perspective change is rewiring somebody's thinking by giving them information that they didn't previously have, by giving them information that now competes for space in the brain with the previously held belief, right? If you can create something that's compelling visually with a very simple, succinct narrative, what you've actually created is a thought bomb that's going to plant itself in somebody's brain. And at that right moment, it's going to reveal itself, and it's going to become the alternate viewpoint, the different lens of looking at the world. The best storytelling takes a problem and a solution and creates a dramatic arc, a story, which has the beginning, the problem, and the end, which is the solution. And a great story puts you in the center of that as the protagonist. When you do that, when you equip people with all of those key concepts, those building blocks, they can suddenly have the conversations that can drive and shift that perspective. That's why we really only focus as storytellers on perspective and not on behavior.
Great, thanks for that. So far, I've heard thought bomb, and when I was looking at your website, there's information artwork. So I feel like I'm learning all these cool terms. So another question is, what has been your most successful experience in using stories? I'm sure that's hard to answer. And what did you do, and what did that success look like?
Well, you know, the work that we make, a lot of which you can see in the background, is very, it follows a formula. We always start with evidence. We always start with facts. We always start with data. But the problem with evidence and facts and data, which are critically important, is that if you don't put a face and a place on it, it's just like a wash of information that passes over you. You have to see yourself in that data. You have to see yourself in those facts. And so everything we do, as you can see, is about people. So we have a formula, which is start with the data, the fact, the evidence, find the person who's the exemplar of the domain expertise in that subject, and then figure out the core language that they use, the terms, the core principles that they use. And then we figure out how to take the data, the person, the core concept, and then place them in a location where they would actually operationalize that knowledge. So if you have the data, the person, the core concept, the place where it's operationalized, I can now actually see what success looks like. And so our work is deeply informed by everything we do from a storytelling standpoint, using those building blocks to set things up. So to be very specific for you and your audience, I was in the Central Valley last week, a farm called Ball's Farm with Ken and Michael. And Ken and I got together beforehand, and I said, I wouldn't really want to spend a day with you, look at your operation. These are what I understand are the core things that you're working on that we can talk about that day. What's going to be happening when we come to the farm? He goes, well, we're going to be harvesting tomatoes, and we're going to be harvesting melons. Okay, what are all of the practices associated with that production that we can capture on that day when we walk the land together? We made a list. So now I had all this data that I presented to him to say, are you saying that these practices line up with what these principles are? Yes. So got the data, got the person, got the core concepts, find the exact locations of the farm on that day that we could document. So we were able to get images that actually explain all those things. So it was a highly utilitarian time we spent together, as opposed to just showing up and saying, so what are you doing today? And just taking what happened, right? So that formula drives all the work that we do. That formula of making the most impactful story from all of those constituent parts. And then collaborating with our subject so that we're helping to tell their story for all of the audiences that they might not even know that they want to reach.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. Another question is, how can we as educators or community extension workers develop the skills needed to tell these better stories?
Well, you know, one of the interesting ironies is farmers and ranchers are supposed to be experts in doing something, and then they're supposed to be experts in marketing what they do as well. I remember once I was on a farm and there was a bunch of people that were getting a farm tour from the farmer. And I said to the farmer, do you do that a lot? And he said, I never knew when I started as a farmer that half of being a farmer is being an educator, right? There's a lot of mystery and a lot of assumptions that people make about how agriculture works. And often they're wrong because people just don't understand or appreciate the utter complexity of a farm. that even if you would do the same thing, it might not work the next year. It might not work 2 years from now, right? How do you explain resilience and adaptability, right? It's not something that you can just read from a book. And what works on one farm might not work on another farm. So I often say to people, from a storytelling standpoint, working with farmers and ranchers, is that you have to capture the knowledge, the native knowledge that this person's applied, but take into account that while some concepts might be universal, the practices are very place-based, and to separate them out, to not talk about things that being universal, but to talk about things that also have to be adapted and have to be place-based from a practical standpoint. And to get at that distinction is really hard to do. And that's one of the greatest challenges of trying to document the story of agriculture.
Thanks. So kind of building on that, what do you see as being the tools that every storyteller needs?
Well, there are storytelling tools in terms of the mechanics of stories, and then there's the tools of the trade, the physical tools. And so we can do those in two parts. One is, from a storytelling standpoint, you have to think in terms of the front page of the New York Times. Everyone knows how to read a newspaper, but it is a learned skill. In other words, there's a headline, there's that little thing below the headline that in one sentence explains what the headline is trying to say. There's the place, Jakarta, and then there's the opening sentence in there. They'll usually have a photograph with a caption on the photograph. There's a pull quote. Any newspaper uses a language and a format in order to deliver the story. Those are all of the pieces that the story needs. And in a way, those are universal, right? We need to know where the place is. We need to know the time of season it is. We need to know a bit about the person that we're documenting. But I always get back to place. Place is the most important thing. Place not only explains what are the localized conditions that are applicable to that person at that time, but also they can draw us into the story. We now have a context of being transported. So place is critical in every story, and also the person is critical in every story. But again, it gets back to our formula: the evidence, fact, and data, the expert, the domain expert, the key language and terminology, the language that they use, because we want to always increase the literacy and the fluency of our audience, right? If you really want people to be engaged on a deep level and have a deep understanding of something, you have to get them conversant in that language, and then you have to explain place. So that's the tools on the storytelling side. The tools on the documentation side is that you should always think in terms of where media is going. There used to be a time where we only shot videos like this, but now on social media, it's like that. I remember once I was in Costa Rica filming, and I took out my phone and I began filming like that. And it was about a breadfruit harvest. And the young breadfruit producer reached over and said, you're videotaping in boomer mode. And he went like this. And he said, now you're in Instagram mode. Okay. So you have to think about the format and where you're going to be delivering something. So always taking into account that every photograph you take, the web likes photographs like this, but mobile devices like photographs like that. So you have to literally, whenever I walk and I start talking to a person, click, click. I now have their portrait a few different ways. When I see signage, click, click. When I see things happening in the field, click, click. Because I don't know. I'm platform agnostic. I don't know where this stuff's going to end up. I'm always thinking that, why am I going to cut off my options because I didn't think it through? If you begin to think about yourself as just often I have to go and document stories that are 10,000 miles away. I'm not going to be going back there if I missed a shot. So therefore, I can't say, hey, listen, can I come back on Thursday because I forgot to do this stuff? I have to think in advance that I'm only going to go there once. I don't want to cut off the opportunities later for the story. I got to think of all the places that could go. It could go on a website. It could go into a PowerPoint presentation that's used, to present the work. It could go on social media channels. It could go into a curriculum. So you have to always think about all the different formats where things could end up and take that into account. And I document every step. If I see a process, I try to document every step of it, because I don't know later who's going to be interested in what step of the process, right? And so you have to take into account all of those steps, what you're documenting. And then in terms of the tools, increasingly mobile phones are amazing, as we all know, right? For video and everything else. And the one comment that people always make about the tools is that the best camera is the one that you have in your hand. And so if all else fails, you can make an entire feature film with a telephone, with a cell phone. So the best tool is the one you have. And the best way to think about things is all the possible ways it could end up. And so all of the permutations and formats that you have to take into account.
Great, thanks for that. Well, it looks like we're right about time to open up the Q&A. I know I have a follow-up questions, but let's hear and take a look at what the participants are wanting to ask. All right, first question here. Can you share the video you made of Canon Michael's farming practices? Is that posted on your webpage?
Well, I'm glad that you're so impressed with my skill for something that I just did a week ago. The reality is that the work with Canon Michael is part of a project we're doing called Regen 1, which is a regenerative agriculture initiative in Northern California. You can find it at regen1.org. And Canon's profile and his stories will be appearing on Regen 1 later in the year, probably in November. Canon is one of dozens of farmers and ranchers all across Northern California that are being documented as part of our project.
Great. Another question here. Are there any good sites that suggest all of the different preferences for different platforms? Or are there other places that collate how to best present for different platforms?
That's a great question, because it's so frustrating, right? There are different video form. We went through a whole period of just making square videos for Instagram, right? Which, as a filmmaker, made me cry, because you want to have a nice panogram, nice vista when you're a filmmaker, but to make something constrained by a little square, was just heartbreaking. I'm sure you can find on the internet, if you were just to type into, to Google, video format for Instagram, video format for TikTok, you would get those fairly quickly. But you have to really think of it this way. There's YouTube, there's Instagram, there's LinkedIn, and there's TikTok, and of course, Facebook. Facebook, you can just show a standard video. Instagram and TikTok like vertical videos. YouTube, of course, is just standard like Facebook. So it's really just a case of, to make it very, very simple, having your camera like that or having your camera like that. It's really as simple as that. And I often will shoot both. I will literally, because when you get in the flow of just realizing it isn't that much more work. When I see a person I'm going to document, I click, and then I click, and then I have it already saved out for both. And then my team breaks them down into, these are photographs for Instagram, these are photographs, for, that are going to be used on the web. And it works. It's a very fast process.
Great. I know that we've been doing a lot of work focusing and trying to hone our skills across our organization on video in particular. So that's super helpful to know. There's another question here. How do you know a story was successful? What are your measures of success?
Well, that's a really complicated question. They say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? So often it depends upon who your intended audience is. The irony is that often your audience is not your intended audience, because often things end up just in the public, like let's say on YouTube, for example. So often it's not the number of views that you have, but it's the right views. Somebody once asked me why we don't spend any time on Facebook. And I once explained that I would rather put that energy into real world likes as opposed to Facebook likes, to create lasting or more permanent relationships as opposed to transient relationships. So I think success would be when the work is used, and success would be anecdotally when we hear all, our film series for PBS called Know Your Food was amazing because we had episodes in classrooms all across the country that teachers would show, but we also had the film shown on Capitol Hill. So, to show the full breadth, we created the USDA's Growing Organic platform, and it was a 3-year journey going around the United States documenting what organic agriculture was. Success for us was the USDA turned it into a book. The USDA turned it into a traveling exhibit that they made for 50 different states, right? And so success was that whenever I'm on USDA's website, our images are all over the website now. Success is that when the USDA puts together new curriculums we're teaching that where they want to explain, examples of a more sustainable agriculture, they always reach out to us first for all of our videos and our imagery. And so often success is people using your work. Success is getting positive feedback for the work. But having said all of that, we really only care about success on one level, which is that if we're documenting somebody, if they say to us afterwards that it adequately conveys what they're trying to do, that for us is success. One of my happiest moments was when I had an exhibit once, and I'd worked, all the words on the pictures we make are the words of the farmer or the rancher that's in the picture. It's actually their words that we write down. And for me, the best moments was when a farmer was showing a bunch of people at an art exhibit his picture, and he called it his picture because he really felt like it was his at that point. So that for us is success. When we feel like we create something as storytellers, and the person who's the protagonist of that story actually feels that the story is theirs, then we feel like we've done our job as storytellers.
Great, thanks for that. We've got another question that just came in. What have you learned in telling ag stories that might help farmers market what is unique about California agriculture? And how would you tell a story about the value of California agriculture?
Well, the fact of the matter is that people don't understand how hard it is to farm. The fact of the matter is they don't understand all the things that don't end up on a label or on the side of a box. We started the Lexicon of Sustainability because I actually had a food company. My wife for 10 years had a goat milk company, and we ended up making an ice cream that was in every Whole Foods in America. It was an amazing journey that we went on. So I'm not just a storyteller. I actually live on a farm. I'm in a barn right now, right? And one of the things that really was an amazing about that journey was we met all these heads of food companies that said all things that they were doing that they never actually bothered to put on the labels of the food because they said consumers would never understand all these complicated things that they were doing. And so they just didn't even bother to put on their packages. And I said, it's just a shame because if consumers knew these things, they would probably have a better opportunity to support it. And one of these food companies was the founder of Horizon Dairy. He said, somebody should create a lexicon of sustainability to explain these concepts to consumers. And that's how the lexicon began, was really to help to tell those stories to consumers. I think that just as consumers, when they understood what a cage-free egg was, or that there was antibiotics in meat, or that there was growth hormones in milk, when we give consumers the opportunity to have a clearer understanding of what are the values that drive a farmer or a rancher, then you give the consumer an opportunity to make a purchase that's more aligned with their values, or more, if a company is a purchaser, more aligned with the mission of the company. So really, the more that farmers and ranchers can do to convey the values that they express through the work that they do on the land, the greater opportunity there is for people to support them in the marketplace.
Great, thanks for that. I don't see another question yet, but I did have a follow-up question. You were talking about the tools of storytelling and the formula and having evidence and facts, and then an expert. Obviously, as a research-based institution, we have that research, and we also work with people to have that native knowledge, as you called it, right? And our experts are both our scientists, but also the people in the communities that we work with. So I'm thinking about how when we tell stories, we're telling stories of partnership, right? We're not just telling necessarily the story of the grower, but we also want to tell how our work helped them further their work and be more successful. So I'm curious if you have any insights about how you tell these stories of, science and growers, or stories of partnership.
Well, you should literally go to the lexicon.org and you should look up growing organic, because it literally was 3 years of me traveling around the United States with district conservationists and soil scientists at NRCS, telling the story of organic agriculture and the story of what they do as district conservationists, working directly with farmers and ranchers, and the impacts that they can have, the positive impacts that they can have in providing that really valuable technical system. So that literally was the project that I did. And that entire project was done from the standpoint of the importance of that technical assistance and how it can really change. One of the great challenges that people have in organic agriculture is that you're asking them to do all these practices. First of all, they have to find the money to do that. They might require new implements that they don't have, but also they need the technical assistance, right? They can't just do this on their own. It's not like they can just, look at the back of a label and it tells them what to do. And that a lot of times that knowledge is only gained over a long period of time, often by somebody that's worked in a region for a long time and knows that adaptability and resilience is really something that literally changes when you walk each farm, or when you walk the land. So yeah, I have a great deal of experience in working with technical assistance providers and how to explain what they do. You can see that at Growing Organic. I can say that it's this. It's a focus on building trust and personal relationships. People trust data, but they trust results that come from people that are just like them. It has to be narratives that are translated into, this is what somebody just like you did. Because as you know, there's a tremendous economic pressure in agriculture on producers. And so they often say, as a technical assistance provider in Minnesota once told me, change in my region happens one death at a time, right? And so how do you get over that generational challenge of implementing new practices or new approaches? And how do you build that trust? That's the big challenge that you guys have in the work that you do. And when you can give evidence through the stories that you tell of those success stories, in that trust and those relationships that are built that sometimes transcend those generational divides in terms of knowledge sharing, then that's when you can have your greatest success.
Thanks for that. I think, as cooperative extension, we're in the business of technical assistance, but it's very much grounded in being in the business of building relationships with people locally. So thanks for that. See that we're just a minute over, and I want to honor your time. I'm going to ask the audience to please join me in giving a great big thanks. I'm seeing comments in the chat about how great this was. So we really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to share your insights with us. And we all have homework. If you haven't seen it yet, I'm going to watch the organic series to see how you made that partnership video work.
Yeah, and and if moving forward, if you and your group would like to every Friday throughout the September and October, I'm somewhere in California documenting the work of all these different producers that are part of Region 1. If anybody in your group would like to join me, I would absolutely love to, to show you how we work, what we do, and if there's opportunities for collaboration, I'm definitely willing to continue to share our insights and find ways we can deepen our relationship with each other.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. So Douglas, maybe you can shoot Mark Bell and I an email about how we can make that connection with you for that work on Friday, and we'll share that out with our colleagues.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Thanks again.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye-bye.